Howdy folks, Comment Cowboy or Atomized if you are on the CGC boards. I've been producing these videos now for the last month and a half to a bit of a small audience, so if you care to subscribe, that will help validate the channel and also give me a bit of motivation to produce more videos. Leave a comment on any category or topic you'd like me to cover, and the common denominator over all the videos and the content that I produce, it's always books in hand. I don't believe that it's particularly interesting to hear anyone simply opine on books without having the book and the material in hand. So here, the skin's in the game, and I got a stack of fun raw books with the theme is all stuff I like to collect that I believe has a bit of upside, that's a bit overlooked and undervalued. And you can have fun collecting without all the heat and intensity that comes with pursuing material that's in a category that is a little hotter, like pre-code horror or certain superhero books. These books, for the most part, aren't particularly hot in market. They certainly have their collectors and they've got their folks that are fans, but for the most part, this material isn't particularly speculative. It's simply a nook somewhere in the collecting universe that you could carve out a little space and build a nice collection, as I've done here to some extent, starting off with Katie Keene. Now, I know a television show has been announced, although the TV shows on CW or whatever it may be don't really move the prices that I can tell on a lot of this material. Nevertheless, it won't hurt for Katie Keene. I started collecting this line, I'd say 3 years ago, just because I wanted to go after something a little less known than Pep and Archie, and there was just some really fun, great covers to pursue, and finding Katie Keene in higher grade and raw state was rather hard to do. A lot of people look at the first appearance in the Wilbur books or Katie Keene 1, but when you go after issue 4, as I've done here, or 19 or any of the other issues in higher grade, that's fairly niche, and these are fantastic, hard to find books with wonderful artwork and fun stories. And here's Wilbur as well. I don't like all the Wilbur covers, but I think this one is particularly awesome, and it's a lot of fun. And these are also very difficult to find in higher grade. There's not a lot of heat on the Wilbur books, and you often do find them in raw state here. They're not often slabbed because collectors don't bother. The price really isn't baked into the goods yet, except for a few covers. Ginger's an interesting one because a lot of the attention is paid on this issue, and I'll talk about that cover in a minute, but I started collecting the other books in the Ginger line. They're difficult to come by. They simply are not, as in my estimate, I haven't looked at the census reports because again, a lot of these books are raw and they haven't been slabbed by collectors because the price really isn't there. The value is not there. Unless you come across this particular book, which you can find these days graded and slabbed. In this particular copy, it looks like I spent $550 on. It looks like a 3.5. That's a pretty competitive price, and I think I picked it up maybe about a year and a half ago off the CGC boards. And this is the book that I call the poor man's Archie 50, which has Betty draped over a couch. This is probably the best cover in the run. The first issue is kind of a classic headlights cover, and that's popular as well. But the books outside of issue 4 by Ginger are fun to collect. They are reasonably priced. They are not that hard to obtain and find. And there's a lot of fun trying to complete a Ginger run. And you're not going to have a lot of pressure from other buyers and competitors pursuing this material, so you can have at it alone for the most part. Moving into some Franzetta covers that he did for Famous Funnies. These are fantastic. And yeah, you know, Franzetta is widely known, yet these books can still be purchased at reasonable prices. And they sort of transcend both the genre of science fiction, and they cross into folks that are interested in Franzetta artwork or Franzetta the comic artist. These are fantastic books. He did a small number of covers of Famous Funnies in the early 1950s, and they are really light years ahead of peers and contemporaries that were producing work in this line, and also, let's say, in Mystery and Space with some of the science fiction that came out of DC. These books, and I like to get them, if I can, raw, because it's just something wonderful about having these in hand, are fantastic, and they haven't really skyrocketed in value. They've appreciated a bit over the last number of years, some nice, slow, incremental growth. But these books are absolutely fantastic and fun to obtain if you can find them. I covered war books in another video. I think the war genre, particularly in the 1950s, and there is a little bit of a demarcation between the pre-code and the code material, not as much a firm line in the sand as you see with the horror books. With the horror books, the pre-code material reigns supreme, and it is very pricey and is very expensive, and it still continues to be a really great category to participate in. But war has a tremendous amount of upside, and whether it's Russ Heath or Don Heck or others, a lot of the same artists that were producing these iconic covers in the pre-code horror genre were also producing material for Atlas in war. And this is a genre that I think has, across the board, the material from the 1950s, the pre-code material. It's very hard to find in very nice shape, in higher grade, has a tremendous amount of room to grow. When this material sells on the CGC boards, if it's not priced too aggressively, flies off the handle. I can't get to those threads fast enough, and the material is gone. There are just collectors that are interested in war, that are absolutely passionate and really interested and knowledgeable about this category. And there's a lot of material out there for you to peruse and become familiar with, and the stories are great, mostly concentrating on the Korean War in the 1950s for the most part. Now I'm going to go into the Blue Beetle, who is well known in Fox. However, a lot of his books, outside of issues, I would say 1 through 9, where there's some of the really iconic covers in the run. Lou Fine did a number of those covers. When you get into the teens, in terms of the issues in the run, or the 30s or the 40s, they are very inexpensive, these Fox Syndicate books. And I don't think they are the most fantastic covers with respect to Golden Age material that I've seen, but let's talk about who the Blue Beetle is for a moment. He is not someone like the Black Terror, for example, that we will never see in the cinema. The Blue Beetle has been rebooted 2 times in very relevant ways. In the early 1960s, he became Ted Kord. And in contemporary comics, whether that's the DC Rebirth line or some of the new DC material, he is Jamie Reyes. So there is a rumored Blue Beetle film in some phase of pre-production or development. We most likely will see, if I was to take a guess, Blue Beetle and Booster Gold, and we'll probably see the Jamie Reyes version of the Beetle, and we may see Ted Kord, who shows up in, I believe, Captain Atom 83, which is a fun book to pick up. But these Golden Age Blue Beetle books are fantastic. They're inexpensive. Mystery Men comics, nothing in that line is inexpensive, particularly the Beetle covers, but you can go today and find these books probably in this shape, issue number 44. That looks to be probably maybe a 4.0 or 4.5, $45 to $50 you could find this book. And I think it's a great investment. I think anytime you can get a hero that is not only still a member of the Justice League, but they're still publishing his material today in the DC Comics line, and he may get his own film. So these books, there's quite a few out there, and you can obtain them at a pretty good price point. I talked earlier about pre-code horror as a genre that I wouldn't say is overlooked or inexpensive, but there is still some material in that universe that you can pursue, and some publishers that I still think have some room to grow. And first and foremost is this material by Standard Comics. You may have seen this particular cover because it's a standout. It's fantastic. The Adventure into Darkness line from the 1950s, if you look at these covers today, unbelievable how contemporary this work looks. It really stands apart from some of the more graphic material that you found in the early 1950s in horror, where there's very realistic depictions. This points a little bit more towards almost a caricature and a style of artwork that you really started to see 30, 40 years from when this was published in contemporary independent horror comics. This is a fantastic, awesome book, and it has its fans. However, some of the other material in the line is lesser known, and it is still absolutely not to be overlooked. These are wonderful, excellent covers, and I just pointed out because I think a lot of the, look at that glare, excuse me, a lot of the material published by Standard just doesn't get the love that I think it deserves, and the covers are imaginative, they're vibrant, they're creative. It's really, I think, the higher end of creativity and excellence in pre-code horror. So I encourage you to look at Standard. I'm moving over to some superhero material as I close out the video. Captain Marvel Adventures issue number 26. Why this particular book? It is the first appearance of Mr. Mind. Mr. Mind, if you saw the Shazam film, appears after the end credits as this little worm in the jail cell. He is an adversary and an enemy of Captain Marvel here, and he may end up being one of the villains or the main villain in the next film. And his first appearance is in this particular book. I started trying to obtain as many copies as I could when I became interested in this particular material, because I just thought in the Captain Marvel Adventures line, there's not a lot of books that are considered keys, meaning there's a first appearance or an origin of in there. This is such an example of that. This is interesting. So this Voodoo copy here is pretty hard to find, and Voodoo isn't really a line that's particularly well known, but if you look closely, does the artist, does the work look at all familiar to you? You can tell by the way the woman here was illustrated that it is indicative, and yes it is, the work of Matt Baker. So in the early 1950s, this Jungle line here produced a series of books, and these are hard to obtain, and when they do come on the market, I think a few very interested collectors go after them. I think they're great, and I just show it to you, you know, in the case that you may see it. Don't miss an opportunity to get it. I spoke about the Blue Beetle and I may do a video about the Blue Beetle because I specialized so much in his material and I've collected so much of it. Here's his first Silver Age appearance in Blue Beetle, published by, I believe this is Charlton, in 1964. So in the 1960s, there were 2 appearances of the Blue Beetle that you may see if you look up the title, let's say on GP Analysis or GPA. It shows up in this, the 1964 version, and also a 1967 version, which has the first appearance of the question. That's also a good book. But this book here is his first Silver Age appearance, and it goes really inexpensively, considering we had not seen this hero in quite a while, since the Golden Age. And in terms of the whole pantheon of Blue Beetle titles, which goes from really 1939 till today, this is one of the seminal books. And it's so inexpensive. I think the highest graded copy is a 9.8, and there's about 3 copies that are 9.6. You can still find this book in 8.5, 9.0, 9.2, in the hundreds of dollars. And if you can imagine, and it's a fun cover, it's a cool book, if this film is ever produced and it's successful with Booster Gold, this will be one of the books that collectors presumably will be interested in. I started to, I suppose, hoard this particular book a number of years ago, and it lifted in value and it came down, and it seems like the prices are recovering to some degree now, but it's still really inexpensive. And when this book was published in '64 by Charlton, the publishing standards and the access they had in terms of the printing quality to the paper itself and the binding and the overall construction of the book was not as high budget as its peers, as Marvel, as DC. Therefore, to find examples of this book in higher grade are pretty hard to come by. I mean, there are only, I believe, again, 3 copies in 9.6 and a number of copies above in the 9.0 near mint range, and it's really expensive. I think you could find this book raw in this shape, which looks to be maybe about a 5.0 or maybe a 5.5, handling it somewhat liberally here, somewhere in the $40 to $50 range. And considering it's the first Silver Age appearance of someone that may have and star in their own film that is still relevant in DC Comics today, I think it's a really fun book to buy. And that is all for the video today. And please do subscribe if you can. I'm trying to push the subscribers up over 100 to help validate the channel. And it's ad-free, and the content's here offered with no restrictions. So I think you hopefully would enjoy that. And thanks for your time.